to say something really quick and then follow up the question. Generally, I don't think the police officers have malicious content in their mind when they do something like this. I think they're genuinely afraid for their life. A lot of them are probably suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And that manifests itself by when they pull over a black person, they feel so much more afraid because they have this constant tape playing in their head of cop shows or, previous shootouts or whatever it is that has caused them to have this construct, this mental construct of interacting with this supposedly dangerous black man. Now, I think we can try to hold police more accountable, but what we really need to do is address that notion that black men are so dangerous. And that I actually have no idea. So my question to you is, are you familiar with programs that are actually effective when it comes to racial sensitivity training for police, of removing that heightened fight, flight, freeze response from them when they interact with minorities?
Well, it's interesting. I appreciate what you say because, and I agree with what you said, that I think it is true that they have a heightened sense of fear. Now, but the question has to be why? Why do they have a heightened sense of fear? Because the reality is that in the city of Portland, no one that is a person of color has ever killed a police officer, has never shot a police officer. And so you have to ask, where did the fear come from? It didn't come from their experience living on the street in the city of Portland, right? It didn't come from what they heard from their friend, who also is a police officer in the city of Portland. We had police officers that retired after 30 and 35 years who had never ever pulled their gun. And they were gang enforcement. They worked when we really had gangs in Portland as compared to now when we have pretend gangs, right? So I think it's a matter of, it's supposedly a matter of training, right? But I mean, I think that as a society, we have painted black men in this manner. And so it's not surprising that in schools, a black male who gets sent to the principal's office gets sent much more often because of behavior that is the norm in the African American community. I'll give you an example. Like, I love riding public transportation. And it's nothing like getting on a bus or the train after school's out, right? And especially if you're riding to East Portland, where I'm riding, where I live, because that's where all the people of color live in Portland now. Okay, most of them. My husband gets mad when I say all the people of color. Most of them. Been pushed out. And so, but when you're riding the train, there's, normally about 4 or 5 African American girls between 12 and 14 years old. And they talk like this, right? And they're all talking at the same time, right? And they're all trying to, and they all understand each other, right? I'm from a family of 10. The first time I took my husband home to meet my family, freaked him out, right? Because all my siblings weren't even there, right? There were like 4 of my siblings at home at that time, and my dad, right? And we're sitting in the kitchen, and we're having 3 different conversations, and my husband is sitting there, and he's like watching like a pinball game, right? He's watching, and we had the ability to go in and out of conversation, right? So I would sit in that conversation for a little while, get bored with that one, move over to that conversation, right? Now, in his worldview, that's just rude people. They're just talking all over each other, and what's going on, right? But that's just how we roll, right? And so I think and so I see those girls on the bus and I go, man, that's me. That's me about, I won't tell you how many years before, but that was me back then. But a white woman sitting there on the bus has not been exposed to a whole bunch of loud black children go, those kids were out of control on that bus. Did you see those kids? They're not out of control. They're just so happy to be out of class, right? And they're on the bus and they're having a good time. And it's a cultural thing. I don't know know about you, but when I go to the mall, I love watching this experiment, right? You go to the mall, you have 3 African-American males under 16. There are 3 things you can be assured of. 1, the women will hold their purses tighter. 2, the men will not make eye contact. And 3, the security guard is on his way. That you can be absolutely sure of. And you think, well, why would that be, right? Because kids are kids. It's because as a society, we have been conditioned to believe that black children are bad. In fact, we decide how many prison beds to build based on the population in elementary school in 6th grade. We decide at 6th grade how many of those 6th graders are going to go to college and how many are going to go to jail. And we plan our prison expansion based on it. And I don't think that we're planning to send a overrepresentative number of white kids to jail, right? And so if the mindset, so if you grow up in a neighborhood where that's the mindset, and so every time somebody looks at you, they're trying to figure out what crime are you about to commit. Can you imagine the kind of pressure you're under day in and day out? In fact, I walked up to kids, and let me tell you how traffic stops. If the gang unit stops you in Portland, this is how that happens. And so we were in Northeast Portland one day, and we saw an African American on one side of the street and an African American male on the other side of the street. And we saw this one police officer walk up, right? And he was like, he had his war gear on. He had weapons all up and down his legs and his arms and all over his chest and his waist. He looked like he was about to go to war. By the time we parked the car, there were 12 police officers that just surrounded these 2 men, right? I'm like, what is going on? These guys must be kingpins, right? And so my husband stops the car. I sit outside the store and observe the traffic stop. The store owner comes out and stands next to me. Then other cars start pulling over and watching. I mean, there's a lot of big men, fully armed. And so the first guy, I see that they've searched him and they've let him go. So I walk over to him and said, what was that about? He said, I let the guy asked me for 50 cents, and I gave him 50 cents to go in the store to get a smoke. So, oh, okay. And walked over to the other guy, because you don't always get the true story. So I walked over to the other guy and said, what's the deal? What was up with that? And he told me the same story. So then I walked up to the police officer who was in charge, and I said, so you always need 14, 12 police officers to pull over African-American men? And he goes, we're the gang unit, and we roll together as a unit. I said, do you see that you look like an occupying force in this community? Well, the data shows that if we roll out as a team, everyone is safer. I said, no, because from where I sit, we are now being occupied, and we're being occupied by police that are in riot gear, right? And so here's something each of you can do. Every one of you can do this. Doesn't cost any special training, won't cost you any money, but every one of you can make police and community members safer. You know how? By observing traffic stops. Because when people are being observed, whether they're police or community members, people behave better. And I've trained my community how to do that. So in my community, in the summertime, if there's a traffic stop, because I live up on 162nd and Stark, up in that neighborhood, and if you listen to the police talk about my neighborhood, here's how the county sheriff describes my neighborhood. He says at 8 o'clock, the drug dealers come out. At 8:30, the prostitutes come out. And at 9, the gang members come out. And I know because I sat up there and watched it. And I said, well, gee, that's interesting, because I walk that neighborhood all times of the day and night. And I've never seen a prostitute. I've never seen a gang member. Have I seen people sell drugs? Yeah. But I've seen them sell drugs downtown. I've seen them sell drugs in Northeast. I've seen them sell drugs in Southwest. So it's like, where do they get their data? Now, my husband asked the question about the traffic stops because he knows that that's one of the things that kind of just makes me crazed. And when you talk about police officers, the fear that they have when they stop African American men, here's the data in the city of Portland. It's been this way for the last 12 years. If you're African American, you're twice as likely to be stopped by Portland police. If you're stopped, you're twice as likely to be searched by Portland police. If you're searched, you're half as likely to have guns, drugs, and other paraphernalia on you as a white motorist if they are stopped. The latest traffic data that came out showed that the more discretion you give a police officer, the more exacerbated racial profiling happens. So, for example, in 2011, the data showed that for traffic violations, African Americans in the city of Portland were stopped at the rate of 6%. Well, guess what? African Americans are 6% of the city of Portland. So you go, okay, that makes sense, right? That's consistent with the numbers in the population. But then, if you look at the stops where it's up to the officer, it's all about officer discretion, all of a sudden the rate, African Americans are stopped at 4 times the rate than would be reflected in the population. And the only difference is when the officer has discretion. So if a crime is taking place, officers are really good at interrupting criminal behavior, right? Not so good at figuring out who may be a criminal. And so, but what does that do to the psyche? Because I talk to teen boys, African American boys all the time, and I ask them, well, why'd you let them search you? You didn't have to let them search you. And the sad part is they say it's easier. If I let them search me, I'll be done in 10, 15 minutes. If I say no, I'm going to be here for 3 to 4 hours. And I've observed the traffic stops that have taken 3 or 4 hours. And so the kids are being trained. Don't worry about your constitutional rights. Just go ahead and get it over with. And to me, being a child of the civil rights movement, that makes me crazy that kids would just give up their right like that. Other questions?
Because what you do sort of rattles the cage of some pretty important people, do you ever get any retaliatory action?
That's a good question. Sometimes they stop returning my calls. But I can tell you, especially with my work on police, a lot of the reason why I do my work on police is because people who've been victimized by police violence can't. Because what they will tell you, Erin Campbell's mom told me about how her family was followed and harassed after they killed her son because they knew that she had filed a suit against the police department. I've heard the same thing from other people who have been killed at the hands of the police. And so many people, either because they've been convicted in the past, don't feel like they have a voice and they can speak up. The interesting thing is, I kind of talk the same way whether I'm talking to the mayor or the police chief or, you know, people try to tell me, you shouldn't talk to the mayor like that. Well, what's he going to do? He's not the boss of me. And I think there's power in the fact that I don't depend on my money. I don't have to get paid by the city of Portland, right? So I think many people would not speak out if they thought that their income and livelihood was at stake. And so I started doing this 25 years ago, working on police issues. And so in that time period, I have just met so many people who say, thank you for doing that. I wish I could. In fact, Kendra James, who it's now been 11 years since Kendra James was killed by a Portland police officer. Her mom came out for a 10th year anniversary celebration of Kendra James' life. Now here was a young African-American woman. She was 22 years old. She had an outstanding warrant to go to court. A police officer stopped her. She wasn't even the driver. She was a passenger in the back seat of the car. When the police pulled the driver out of the car, looked at his ID. Kendra James got the idea she was going to slip into the front seat and drive the car away. The police officer, because he put his body into the vehicle while she was driving away, said he had no choice but to pull out his gun and shoot her, because what else could he do? Because he was going to get hurt. Kendra James' mom's family, after 10 years, was able to come publicly and share her story about what happened to her daughter. The toll this takes on people. I talked about Keith Notice. His dad was a really good friend of mine, Fred Bryant, and unfortunately he died a few months back. He died in October. And it was certainly exacerbated by his son being killed by Portland police. He ended up having a heart attack shortly after his son was killed. But he was on the front line every single day seeking justice for his son. And it didn't matter to him how tired he was there every single day. I'm going to make sure my son gets justice. And unfortunately, he died before he was able to do that. But the community has decided we're going to continue to seek justice for his son. Yes, Kelvin.
I got 3 questions. First,
Three?
Ms. Hardesty, the first is I want to thank you for your leadership in standing up for families for all these years. It took a federal amendment to give women the right to vote, and I see why, because they had champions like you. So thank you for your leadership. The first question is, these are the future leaders here. They're the ones who are going to be the police chiefs. They're the ones who are going to be the city administrators, etc. What does servant leadership mean to you, and what should it mean to the professors who are teaching them for the future? And then the third is a general statement. I'll be real quick. History gives us the best answer, and history suggests to us that our 3 branches of government is supposed to be controlled by elected officials. But yet in this city, the elected officials have demonstrated no courage in terms of addressing things, and as such, the next step up is the federal courts. So can you speak a little bit about the role and responsibility of elected officials in regulating these systems? Because what I see at the neighborhood level, I see whites, blacks, gays, straight, men, women working together. But when it gets to that level of power, that's where I'm seeing the distinction between race and influence and power. So I got a couple questions in there. Can you respond?
I'm going to try. With the last one first. And so servant leadership, right? I mean, I knew a long time ago that what I wanted to do was work with people to build new leaders. And so I am all about working with folks so that they take on leadership. I don't feel like I need to be in public office anymore. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt, coffee mug. But what I realized is that helping people find their voice and use that voice is so key. And so I have a show on community radio. It's called Voices from the Edge. It's on K-Blue every Thursday morning from 8 to 9. And so I use that as a vehicle, both to get information out, to educate the public on what's going on, to activate the public and what's taking place. But servant leadership isn't about the position that you're in, right? It's about the work that you're committed to. And it's not about titles, it's not about position. And if I had a quarter for every time somebody asked me when I was running for office again, I'd be really rich and I wouldn't ever have to run for office again. But it's more about being clear about what the goals are. And so for me, I had the wonderful opportunity to work with 18 students from Portland State University when we were preparing for the fairness hearing. And they were in their first community organizing class, and they had to have practical experience. They had no idea when they signed on that they were going to have a 7-week community organizing one-on-one on the ground. But that's what they got, and they loved it. I think the last part of your question, I think I got lost. So I think that was kind of part of the first and the last, but is there a piece that I can...
The role that if you're...
Oh, the elected leaders,
elected
yes.
leaders.
Yes. Well, Many times, especially now, I think we've lost political courage in our city, in our elected leaders, and I think that that's reflected in the fact that we keep electing the same people over and over again. I mean, how is it possible you elect the same governor when he wasn't that good the first time he was elected, right? And all of a sudden we elect him again. Clearly we've got young, bright, energetic, visionary people. The people that are running for office today aren't people that are setting a pace for the future, right? I don't want a political leader that says, this is where we are now, but this is my vision for the future. And this is how I see us getting there. We don't have that anymore. And that's why you guys have to hurry up and graduate and then run for office, and then we'll have that. Because the reality is I think we have politicians that play it safe. And they will put their finger up to the wind to see which way the political wind is blowing before they come up with a proposal. And that's not visionary leadership. That's not people that are actually looking at where we're going to be 20 years from now and putting the pieces in place today. For example, I'd like to see an elected leader talk about, really, what do green jobs look like for the future? And how do we get Oregon prepared to be #1 when it comes to green jobs? And the thing about green jobs is green jobs, some of them you don't even have to have a high school diploma to do, right? And we're not even talking about the spectrum of people that need jobs, right? We keep talking about giving Trader Joe's a $2.5 million tax break because that poor international company, they couldn't possibly build a grocery in Northeast Portland without a major tax break like that, right? I mean, how insulting to people who've lived in a community for 20, 30 years that you would give away that kind of money to a multinational company that isn't broke. They're not broke by a long shot, right? But that's the kind of decisions that our current political leaders make that aren't rooted in reality and having a vision for where we're headed into the future. Other questions? Scott?
Oh.
I totally saw it.
You were so nice, and I was just going to itch my face. I'm so sorry. You caught me. That was great. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I saw it. That's what it looked like.
It's too I'm sorry. Yeah.
Called the angry black woman.
Right. I feel like there's a desire, like America wants black culture, but without black culture.
That's a profound statement. Did you guys hear that? America wants black culture just without black people. I'm going to steal that. Thank you. Oh yeah, let me tell you, that's a no-no. Don't. That cannot be the first question you ask a person of color, okay?
But if you speak up and all of a sudden you're out of the
And so you're absolutely right. And that's kind of the balancing act people of color play all the time, right? Because you have to pick. You have to decide, is this the moment I'm going to get like ticked off and just go off on this individual, right? Or am I going to just hold my tongue this time, right? And it is always a constant choice. Before I forget, I want to give you this website called www.standingupforracialjustice.org. Standingupforracialjustice.org. That is the place that has the toolkit for white people to have the conversation about race around cases like Trayvon Martin. But of course, Trayvon Martin isn't the only one, right? Remember, just recently there was a case, I believe in the same state, where a white male shot into an automobile with 4 African-American kids, and one of them died, and the jury could not convict him for murder. I mean, how is that even possible? So, I don't know if you know the story, but the kids were in the car, they were playing the music loud, the guy was in his car, and he didn't like the loud music they were playing, and he told him to shut the music, turn the music down, and the kid said no, and so they got into a verbal back and forward, and then the guy pulls his gun and goes over to the car where the 4 black kids are sitting and shoots them, and one of them dies, and then there's a trial. And then he's found guilty of 3 counts of attempted murder, but the jury could not deadlocked on whether or not a murder was committed. I mean, you can't explain that. There's no way to explain that except we live in a society that devalues black life. That's the only way to describe that. And so the question about what do you do? Because people of color die they die from 1,000 little stripes at a time. It's kind of like the slice with a you ever had a paring knife, right? And so I think it's back to the microaggression that the lady was talking about earlier. But it's like, you know, sometimes you can be sitting in a meeting and somebody will say just the stupidest, most racist thing, and you think, I'm the only person of color here. Do I speak up? Do I sit and wait for my white allies to speak up? Or do I just let it go? I'll give you a great story. My very first day in a legislative session, right? Brand new legislator. We just went through the pomps and circumstance of being sworn in. So I go up to the lounge, legislator lounge, right? So nobody can go in there but legislators. And so I'm in there, nobody else is around. I'm in there. First thing I do is open the refrigerator, stick my head in. I hear this voice behind me go, what are you doing here? You can't be in here. And so I had the good devil and the bad devil. And I knew from my home training that I should turn around and just smile and say, hi. And then, but the other side of me was like, damn it, I just got elected. I'm here. I'm supposed to be here. You know, how dare me, right? But my mom went out. And so what I did was turn around and put the biggest smile on my face and went, hi, I'm Representative Bowman. Who are you? And he went, but you look so young. Now, by a show of hands, how many of you think that? But let me tell you the end of that story. You may think that that's the end of that story, but it's not. This particular gentleman, because he was able to save face that day, right? I didn't go all Baltimore on him and shut those big on him. I didn't do that. Because he saved face that day, because I treated him with dignity, and I had to think, this is my first day as an elected person. Do I really want to get into, this with somebody? And I decided not to. But that gentleman, from that day on, I did not have to be in a legislative hearing room for him to say, well, if Representative Bowman was here, she would tell you that that law would have a detrimental impact on her community. She would tell you that this is going to send kids in her neighborhood to jail faster and longer. And he did that for his entire legislative career. Now, would he have done that if I'd have been all up in his grill that day? No. Right? He would have just said, oh, that angry black woman, stay away from her. And so, sometimes when we take that deep breath and go, okay, I'm gonna let that one go, it works out well. But I've had days where I've had to actually pull people out of a meeting and have a one-on-one with them. And when they came back in, they were red. It wasn't because I hit them, it was because I had some quality conversation with them. And they can, and so you have to be able to pick and choose, but you also have to make sure that you're taking care of your own mental health. Because as long as you remember, it's not you, it's them. Right? It's not you, it's them. So whatever it takes to take care of your mental health would be my recommendation. Because it's hard. Some days are easier than others. Yes, sir.
Do we have time so I can take one more question?
Okay, we have one more question. Think it through. Who's the brave soul?
Actually,
Okay.
you were talking about how there's a lot of change from black culture to for one man to walk another the code switch and speaking to people let people know what you're aware in the morning based on the type of people you're interacting with today, that white people don't have to have those conversations with themselves. And I think in our culture, and this is more of a statement question, I think in our culture, I don't really understand how we went from Smokey Robinson and Martin Luther King to JoAnn and the Ying Yang Twins. I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, how do you get Dr. Martin Luther King and then 50 years later, John Will happened? I don't understand. It blows my mind. And I think that's where I let my anger. I think that's cultural subjugation and oppression, where systematically we are disempowered because we're just constantly told over and over again, being the way that you look, you can't act the way that you act. You have to act even more Caucasian because you have to compensate. So then you internalize that change of that conversation with yourself over and over again. Am I not fitting in because I don't have the right social skills? And maybe it doesn't occur to you till you get older. It did to me. That no, when they look at me, they just see a large black man and they feel afraid. It doesn't occur to them that I'm somebody that could be the answer to their prayers, the relationship that they wait for, the employee that they want, and invite me into their inner circle. So, because it's a cultural shame. It's a cultural shame. And that, to me, like I said, that's where I come from.
Well, that's a really good point. And I know the gentleman mentioned earlier about like the N-word in music videos and how that becomes like normalized because it was in a song or something. A couple of things about what you said, though. I certainly agree that I used to say that African Americans had to be trilingual because we have to be able to communicate in the neighborhoods that we grew up with our friends, and that's a totally different communication style and a way of engaging than it would be, say, in a business setting. In a business setting, we're taught that we have to act a certain way in order to fit in and not scare other people who are in the business setting, because, you know, we want to be part of the team, we want to be a team player. And when you move into professional life, you also, I mean, I was taught as a kid that we had to be 3 times better in order to just like qualify, right? That's what that was just drilled into my head as a kid, that's just the fact, and you just have to live with it. But we don't just have to live with it, right? What we really have to do is to take some of the burden off ourselves, right? Because as soon as we realized, and it took me a long time to realize that it was them and not me, right? I went through a lot of time going, gee, you know, maybe it is me. When I went to run for office, the first thing they told me to do was change my hair. They told me that I had to stop wearing the ethnic jewelry that I was wearing, and that I had to, you know, I had to look a certain way. And I thought, I could make all those changes, but then I would not be the person that was running for office, right? And I decided, if they're not gonna vote for me because my hair is like this, oh well, right? And I didn't change it. I didn't stop wearing ethnic jewelry. So I disregarded all the advice that the political smart people gave me that told me that this is how you win elections. And guess what? I won, and I got elected 3 times, right? And so once you decide, you know, this is cool, right? God didn't make any mistakes. This is cool. I like this. And if you don't like it, oh well. Once you get in that mind frame, because when I was younger, I was stressed out a lot more. I'm not stressed out now, because I don't like who I am, right? And so it's up to the other person. And if they can't deal with me like one-on-one, oh well. I had people in the mayor's office trying to hold me back when I'm having a conversation with the mayor. And I had to tell the woman, I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to the mayor. And if the mayor doesn't like how I'm talking, he's got a mouth, he'll speak up. Right? Because that's just, I'm just going to put it on the line, right? Because once you get my age, you don't have to worry about impressing people anymore, right? It's like, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, and you're either on board with me, or you can just step aside, because I'm going to do it anyway. Thank you guys so much for your attention.